Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hacksprint this quarter. My name is Eugene, and I am the director of this workshop series. This is the first time we're going to be teaching mobile development through React Native, so I'm really excited to be the first person pioneering that. And with that being said, yeah, let's get right to it. So first off, a couple of logistics out of the way. If you want to have these slides directly on your computer, feel free to click the tiny URL, or sorry, someone can put that in the chat for the slides there. And also we have a README with a guide that accompanies this presentation with some more information related to what I'm going to be talking about today. So feel free to click that as well. I'll just give it a bit on this slide. Okay. So if you are interested in keeping up with the membership portal, this is the attendance code for today. It is app avatar because the goal of this workshop series is for all of you to be the master of all mobile platforms using just one framework. Yeah, so the membership portal, for those of you who aren't familiar, are just, it's something part of ACM. It's just a competition that we do every quarter to try and encourage people to go to different workshops. And for each workshop you go to, there's a different code associated to them. And you can just build up your points and work towards pretty cool prizes. So that's always cool. Yeah. We also have a feedback form linked at the bottom. We do really appreciate any feedback you have related to these workshops because they really do help us make them better in the long run. So whenever you get the chance after this workshop, please fill out that feedback form. And this isn't written here, but we are going to be doing a raffle for anyone who fills out these feedback forms. You get a chance to win an Amazon gift card, so that's cool too. Okay, so Hacksprint this quarter is going to be having its own Discord server. This is so that everyone can have this community that we can work together in creating apps. And that's the link for there if you want to join that. Here's the central source for everything Hacksprint related this quarter. If you have any questions related to the workshops, you can go there. The recordings will also be posted here. And in the future, we're going to be also doing some project groups, which I'll talk about a little later. And you can coordinate with your group inside there too. Okay, so here's the weekly schedule for this entire quarter. Every Wednesday from 6 to 8 p.m. PST, we're going to be hosting workshops just like this one right now. And each week is going to be centered around some area about React Native. And each workshop is going to be building off of the other one. And eventually you'll be a full-fledged React Native developer. We're also going to be doing recurring office hours every Thursday. And these will be dedicated to helping you set up React Native on your very own computer, and also helping you with any bugs you have when you have working on your own app. So tomorrow is the first office hour. It's going to be the only one where we're going to have a prepared thing for you guys to work on. We're going to be helping you guys set up React Native on your own computers, and we're going to be doing this through Expo, which is a special program that makes a lot of React Native app development a lot easier. Okay, so with that being said, group projects. As I mentioned before, you will get a chance to work on your very own app with a group throughout the quarter, and you'll be able to apply all the fundamentals and all the concepts that we're teaching you right now. There's going to be a project showcase where you and your group can show off to everyone else in Hacksprint what you guys were able to create throughout the quarter. And this will be during our week 10 workshop. We're going to be sending out a group formation form next week, so you can fill that out and see what you're interested in when you're looking for partners. And we'll also let you have a chance to come with your own partners if you want to work with a friend. Okay, and before we get into this, I do want to preface it by saying that if you have any questions at any point, please feel free to stop me or ask a mentor in the chat. What does something mean? If you want me to go back a slide, I'm happy to do that too. And if I can repeat anything as well. There's a lot of content that we're going to be covering, so I don't expect you to absorb all of it 100% immediately. So feel free to stop me anytime. Okay, Um, cool. With that being said, let's jump right into React Native. But before we talk about that, I should probably talk about cross-platform mobile development. That'll give you some substance related to that. But before that, I should probably talk about native mobile development. You know what? Let's just talk about mobile development first in general. Yeah, let's do that. Let's do mobile development. So mobile development is not just about building phone applications anymore as it used to be. Now it's expanded its definition to encompass anything that is mobile, which is what anything that you can carry around with ease. So that can be your phone, that's your tablet, your smartwatch, anything that you can carry. And mobile development has expanded in a way that made it dividable into three main categories. There's native development, there's mobile web apps, which is just websites that are responsive enough for you to view it on your mobile browser. And finally, there's cross-platform or hybrid development, which we'll be talking about a little later. So native mobile development is apps. Native apps are created from native development, and they're apps installed directly on the mobile device. So you can tell an app is native when you install it from a platform's distribution service. So that's on the iOS, that's downloading apps from the App Store, and for Android, that's downloading it from Google Play. So previously, the only way to do mobile development was through native development, and that required you to have platform-specific language and tools that you had to use. So for iOS, these means you had to use Objective-C, Gross, and Swift, which was added later. And for Android, it was Java, and later they added Kotlin, which actually translates back into Java. So this is cool and all, but this means that we have to learn all these different languages and technologies if we want to create our app on different platforms. And we can't just have some magic translation device that translates all our Objective-C code into Java. We have to start straight from scratch. And this means that if we want to, for some reason, make our app for Windows OS, which is also a phone OS, I just found out like last week, we would have to learn that stuff. We have to learn that language and that technology. And I think they do that in C and C++. So for a beginning developer or for a college student, this is a bunch of things you have to learn just to get your app available on multiple platforms. So what if there was some magical technology that just allows us to learn one language or technology and then use that across all platforms? But wait, hold up. Across all platforms? Across all platforms? Cross-platform, hold up. Yes, later on, cross-platform or hybrid development was created. And using this technology, we're able to build apps across multiple platforms only using one code base, which is crazy. This is really magical. You probably heard of multiple solutions. I see Flutter in the chat. Yes, Flutter is one of those technologies. One we'll be talking about today, which is by far the most popular currently, is React Native. And you also may have heard of Ionic and Xamarin. And these are all basically just solutions to the same issue of having to learn all these different technologies just to build your app on multiple platforms. Okay, so with that being said, we can finally get into React Native, which is one of those cross-platform technologies. So React Native is a JavaScript tool used for building native mobile apps. And this point of distinction is pretty important because what it does is it takes your JavaScript code that you write and then it translates it into each platform that you're trying to build on. So if you're trying to build for iOS, it'll translate your JavaScript code into Objective-C. And if you are building Android apps, it'll translate your JavaScript into Java. And again, it's cross-platform. So that's really cool. You just learn it once and you write it anywhere. It is backed by Facebook. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, up and coming startup, which means it has a lot of community support and a lot of people are making creative React Native apps. So it's not going anywhere anytime soon. And I've linked the official React Native website here if you want to learn more info a little bit later on. So there are pros and cons, unfortunately, related to using React Native. If there were only pros, then literally everyone in the industry would be using React Native. So I keep mentioning pros. You learn it once, you write it anywhere. And because of that, it's faster to build. And because it's easier and you only have to learn JavaScript, a lot of startups that are just starting up or a lot of people who are just making apps for fun really love using React Native because of its ease of entry. And arguably, JavaScript has a lower learning curve. It's one of those in quote unquote intuitive languages that they say is easy to learn once you pick up language programming for the first time. But yeah, unfortunately, there are some cons. Um, Generally, there is slightly worse performance when you work with React Native apps. And this is coming straight from having to first translate the JavaScript into the native code. So that's Objective-C or Java. And even though that time is really small, and for the most part, you can't really tell if you're a user, it does build up over time. And the more complex your UI becomes, it'll start to show more and more obviously, like if you want to add crazy animations or something. So if you see yourself making a really UI intensive, really animated app, native development might be your answer there. And finally, it is dependent on Facebook. Although this is a very rare happening um, because it's so popular right now and there's so many community support, technically Facebook could axe this project entirely all of a sudden out of nowhere. And that just means that all the React Native apps that were created are suddenly not able to work. Again, that's highly unlikely because of how popular React Native is right now and how much support they're getting, but it is a risk nonetheless. Okay, so here is a Google Trends screenshot of Android development, iOS development, and React Native development. We can see that iOS and Android development have remained mostly steady over time, but over the recent years, React Native has really boomed in popularity. So the point of this screenshot is even if you don't work with app development your whole life, it is still something worth learning. So with this stuff, you might be asking us, Hack, are you just trying to teach us technologies that are really popping, really popular right now? Anyways, here's some apps that use React Native. You can tell there's some that you can immediately recognize. There's Facebook, there's Instagram, there's Discord. This is basically the entire UCLA ecosystem. And all of these were created using React Native, surprisingly. And yeah, I've also linked a full list to all the apps currently using React Native. The React Native website keeps track of all those. Okay, before I go into the demo, are there any questions I can answer? Where's CCLE? No comment. Okay. So this is going to be a very bare bones demo. I don't want to get into too much of the nitty gritty. I just want to show all of you what it's like to work with React Native using Expo. So what I'll be using a code text editor to write my JavaScript in. And the one that I would recommend, or the one I will be using, is VS Code. And we'll also be using Expo, which I'll talk about now. So Expo is a program interface that allows you to work with React Native. It's a set of tools and services that's built around React Native and native platforms that really eases the development process. It really hides a lot of the ugly stuff away from us, especially because we're just starting. And it does help us manage most of the React Native workflow. So all we have to do is enter a few commands and we're good to go. And we're off on the races when we're creating React Native apps. There are a couple of limitations that I've linked here. Of course, like Expo isn't able to directly access cameras on different phones. So for that, you might have to jump into native code. For a full list of that, you can feel free to click this on the slides. And I wanted to get this out of the way too. For the purposes of this workshop, we highly recommend that you don't code along. It's just that if you are coding along and trying to set this up for yourself at the same time I'm showing you stuff, you might find it's very easy to get lost. And we'll also be helping you guys set up this at office hours tomorrow. So don't feel obligated at all to have any of these programs set up beforehand. And if you're unable to make the office hours from 6 to 7 p.m. tomorrow, we also have set up instructions in the README under the creating your own React Native app section. Okay, let's hop into it. So if I have everything set up, that's my Discord. Hopefully it's still there. Cool. Okay. So beforehand, I prepared this little React Native app that I wrote. It is a Tinder clone. Here's the code. You don't have to understand any of it right now. And yeah, you can see that we can make pretty cool looking apps. You can swipe left, swipe right. This isn't any judgment of these actual people. I'm just going left and right. Please don't come after me. Okay, cool. And we can see that we have animations set up, we have layouts, we have a nice UI, and all this is written in JavaScript. And I'm currently running this in an iOS simulator, and this is in Xcode. So if you are on Windows, unfortunately, you won't be able to use the iOS simulator. But the good news is that the main area that you'll be working with Expo with is actually on your physical phone, because there's an Expo app that you can scan these apps into and work with them directly there. Michael does do freelance, yes. Okay. So let me also take this chance. Whoops. Okay. So let me kill the server, because Expo runs their apps in servers, and that's how we're able to build these React Native apps. I'm closing the server using Control-C, and that's Control-C for both Mac and Windows, by the way. Okay, so let me go ahead and open up a separate place that will show you guys exactly what you'll start out with using Expo. Let me not save. I don't remember what I changed there. Okay, so here is what Expo gives us as our bare bones app. And how I got this was from a simple command on the terminal. All I did was run expo init React Native demo. And once I pressed enter, it helped create a blank JavaScript React Native app. And once I set up all of that, all these folders are already set up for me automatically. There's a bunch of nice folders they've left for me, bunch of other stuff they've installed just so that we can work with React Native. And all of this was automatically done, so we didn't have to actually understand what was going on. And the main file that we will be working with to change most of the UI or change how our app looks is in app.js. I'm going to leave it at that for today. And we're just going to be able to dissect all of this as the workshops go on. I do want to call out, though, that React Native demo was just an arbitrary name I came up with. You can name this anything you want, my app, Tinder, all that stuff. But let me go ahead and start this React Native app, which is using the command expo start. And once I press enter, it'll say a bunch of stuff, and it'll open up this expo server that will have my app running on it. And all this is being done automatically. I didn't click over to Google Chrome really fast. Okay, so this is the graphical interface for the expo server for my app. We see a bunch of stuff. We also see this QR code here. I'm actually zoomed in a little bit so you guys can see, but once you hover over that, if you scan this QR code with your phone, it'll open up the Expo app on your device, assuming you've already downloaded the Expo app. And there you can directly see all the changes that you make in real time once you save. But for the purposes of screen sharing, I'm going to go over here to run on iOS simulator. So that'll open up this simulator in Xcode. This will inevitably take some time. So let me see, reload. Building. How's everyone's day?
Pretty good. How about you?
Nice, nice. Not too much, just teaching a workshop.
Dang, that sounds hard.
Any questions while this is going to?
I had a quick question. So you said that we can't run the iOS simulator on a Windows, but can we still create an app for iOS through Windows using React Native, or are those only, would those on a Windows only be for Android?
Yeah, no, you definitely can.
Okay.
If you're on Windows, you can definitely write code for iOS because both iOS and Android are going to be using the same JavaScript code. But for testing, you will still need at least an iOS device.
Okay.
But you don't have to be coding on iOS either. You can also be doing the Android stuff. And for Windows, you can download Android Studio, and they have an Android simulator there that'll let you test there.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Oh, it's done. Okay, cool. So this is just what Expo gives as the default stuff. And it just says open up app.js to start working on your app. Apologies if the font's too small, but we'll get into styling a little later. Okay, one thing I wanted to show was that one cool thing about Expo and this server being run is that, let me actually put this on the left. Once I edit this in any way, let's just do something arbitrary. Once I hit save on here, you'll see that the simulator automatically refreshes with the changes that we made. And this is all possible through Expo, which is pretty neat. But yeah, that's all I wanted to demo for today. We will dissect all of this later. This won't be all gibberish for you. So be on the lookout for that. Okay. Oh boy. Let me open up another window. Sorry for the delay. Okay. Cool. And with that being said, let us take a break. The rest of this workshop is going to be all about JavaScript, which is the thing that makes all of this tick. So let us take a 10-minute break. Let us come back at 6:37. And now I'm seeing that this is a view-only version. But yes, I will edit this. Okay, hello, welcome back everyone. It is 6:37 now, so let's get back into it. Okay, so this second half is going to be all about JavaScript, which is the programming language that is behind everything that React Native does. Before we get into the details, here is a meme for all of us to enjoy. Yes, he's smoking salmon. I don't know what else you can smoke. Okay. So before we start, let me give a quick disclaimer. The pace I'm going to go at right now is going to be assuming that you do have some programming experience from maybe another language. So if you're coming from a complete zero, you might not catch everything. The good news is that I've left some resources in the README for complete beginners that'll go much more slowly and more detailed pace. Yeah. Also, we're going to be on the Hack Sprint Discord, basically 24/7 for all your questions. So also drop your questions there. Okay, so let's get started with the console. So what the console is in JavaScript is basically a convenient way to run JavaScript code in the browser. One of the more popular ones is Google Chrome's Developer Tools console, but you can also find consoles for other popular browsers such as Firefox and Safari. And one cool thing about the console is that every single JavaScript line that we write, once we press enter, we can immediately see the results on the line. And the way you interact by printing in the console is by using console.log. Okay, so I'm just going to demonstrate how you use the console in Google Chrome right now. Just make sure that you're on any tab in Google Chrome open. You right-click anywhere on the page, you select Inspect, and that will open up a window. For me, it's this. Let me show you guys what it would be by default. By default, it probably would look something like this. It would be side by side on the page, and it'll pop open. And the way I had it pop out into its own window is by clicking this ... here and clicking this on the dock side. So once I do that, I have this on its very own window. Once I'm here, I click the console tab to access the console in JavaScript. So let me just print out something random. I'll do console.log hello. And once I press enter, it'll say hello, printed in the console. Very cool. Okay. So another thing in JavaScript is comments. And even though these don't do anything by themselves, they don't really do much computation in JavaScript, they're a nice way to annotate your code just to give yourself a more clear idea about what it's used for. And it's a nice way of keeping track of different code. Also, you can leave yourself a to-do, which you can go back to later, which is also pretty nice. And the way you do comments in JavaScript is by doing 2 forward slashes for a single line comment, or / star to start your multi-line comment, and to end it, you would do */. Okay, so every kind of information in JavaScript is a value, and every value is of a certain type in JavaScript. There are a couple of basic types in JavaScript. The ones that we'll be going over today are numbers, strings, and Booleans. Okay, so numbers are as what you expect are numbers. 20 is a number, 3.33 is a number, 6e23 is a number. This is scientific notation, so this is the same thing as 6 times 10 to the 23. And with numbers, you can perform certain operations on them using arithmetic operators in JavaScript. And these arithmetic operators are parallel to whatever you learned in elementary school about addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. The addition is the plus sign, subtraction is the minus sign, multiplication is the asterisk, and division is the /. You also have comparison operators, and these will compare 2 different numbers and will give you whether that statement you just said is either true or false, depending on whether that comparison check is true. So the way you check for equality is using the triple equals. You do exclamation point and double equals for not equals. And then you have your very standard less than, greater than, less than equal, greater than or equal. You might be wondering why it's a triple equals in JavaScript if you've never worked with it before. and why it isn't a double equals like it would be in another language like C++ or Java. The short answer is we always recommend you to use triple equals over double equals in JavaScript. It basically does the same action as double equals would in another language, and overall it's safer. So we would recommend that. So I see a question. Is there a way to save our work in the console? From what I remember, I don't think you can. You'll only have one session, but within that session, you can access lines of code that you've written before in that session by using the up or down arrow. Okay, so strings are our second type, and strings are sequences of characters. And the way we show JavaScript that it is in fact a string is by enclosing our sequence of characters in either single quotes or double quotes. In JavaScript, it doesn't matter which one you choose as long as the one on the left and right are consistent. In other languages, it might be a difference between single quotes and double quotes, but either one is fine here. And just like numbers, there are operators that you can perform on strings. So you can concatenate strings, which is basically combining two strings and making one string out of them using the plus operator. So here I have two separate strings, I love and React Native. Once we do the plus concatenation on them, it forms one string that just says I love React Native. And also, we have the same comparison operators available to us, just like we did for the numbers. We have the triple equals, which will check if the strings are exactly the same. And this is case sensitive. So if you have a capital, it won't be the same as a lowercase letter. We have the double, we have the not equals, and we have the less than, greater than, less than equal to, or greater than or equal to. And these will check whether the one on the string on the left is less than for the less than operator, the right one, and this means if it comes before the other one in the alphabet. So it's alphabetical order. Okay, and lastly, our final type is Booleans, and these take on one of two possible values, either true or false. I wish life was that easy. But with Booleans, we also have logical operators associated with them. So we have the AND operator, which only returns true, results in true if all of the Booleans are true themselves. We have the not operator, which just flips the value of the Boolean. So if it's true, not will make it false, and false will become true. And lastly, we have the OR operator, which will return true if one of the Booleans are, at least one of the Booleans are true. And don't be afraid of all this is very abstract. I'm going to be going into a more tangible example so you guys can see exactly what I mean. But one thing I wanted to point out, because this has been a point of confusion before, is this symbol is the symbol on the right side of your keyboard. It is not the lowercase l, which is what I thought when I started JavaScript and was too embarrassed to ask someone about. And the way you access that is by just doing Shift and that key. Okay, so let's hop into some examples. So let's start out with numbers. We have very standard stuff with numbers. So we have 10 plus 20. And once you press enter, that gives you what you expect. So 30. 10 minus 20, again, gives you negative 10. 10 times 20, 200. And 10 divided by 20 gives you 0.5. Cool. This is all good stuff. Let's look at the comparison operators. 10 is less than 20 will give you true, which is the Boolean true, because 10 is in fact less than 20. However, if we check if 10 is greater than 20, this will give us false, because 10 is not greater than 20 in this world. 10 is strictly not equal to 20, so this will give us false as expected. But if we change this to the not equals, it will give us true, because 10 is in fact not equal to 20. Okay, let's take a look at some strings. Let's take the one straight out of the slides. I love, and you can see I've done this example before. React Native. And once you press enter, the concatenation will give us one string that just says, I love React Native. One cool thing about string concatenation is that both strings don't have to be strings. As long as one of them is a string, it will produce string concatenation for all of them. So if I say something like, my favorite number is plus 7, the number 7. If we press enter, it will give us a string, which is my favorite number, 7. Okay, let's take a look at the comparison operators for this for strings. So if we have one string that's just my name, and we have another string for, say, Jody, who's another hack officer, we are not the exact same string. So when I check if we're equal, we're false. But if I do not equals to Jody, this will give us true because these are two different strings. We can also check if Eugene comes before Jody in the alphabet. So that would be Eugene is less than Jody. And that gives us true. And again, I want to reiterate that this is coming before in the alphabet, and it does not signify any physical worth between me and Jody, at least in the JavaScript context. And let's do greater than, which as we expect, because Eugene comes after Jody in the alphabet, this will give us false. Okay, so let's take a look at Booleans. As I mentioned before, they're true and false. When it starts being cool is when you start applying logical operators to them. So true and operator true will give us true. However, anything that isn't both or all being true will give us false. So true and operator false will give us false. False and true will give us false. And then false and false will give us false. The OR operator will return true if at least one of them is true. So just like the AND case, if both of them are true, we'll of course get true. But where it becomes different is when one of them is false, which in this case, it still gives us true. Again, if the first one is false instead, and we do false or true, it'll give us true. And only when both of them are false will this give us false. Okay, lastly, we have the not operator. So not true is false, not false is true. So one thing about Boolean expressions is you don't have to literally put true and false when you're using logical operators. Logical operators only check if the expression, whatever is on the left or right, results in a Boolean, true or false. So if we take what we learned just now about comparison operators resulting in a Boolean, we can do something like, is 3 less than 5? And is Eugene less than Jody? So if both of these on the left and right are true, then this will give us true. But, and let me use the up arrow right now to get the previous line back. If I just change this to greater than, this will become false because in the AND operator, both have to be true. Okay. Are there any questions I can answer? I see some of them already have been answered in the chat. Okay, if we're good, then let me pop open our first poll on types, values, and variables, just to see how you guys are doing. And this is just a quick poll for you guys to get some more practice with this and for me to also see how well you guys are doing. I'll stop the poll when the majority of you have finished. So. Okay, let me share results. Okay, so, oh, let me stop the lo-fi. Okay, so, cool, yeah, number 1 is the meaning of life is 42. Just like I mentioned before, if you concatenate a string with a number, everything will be treated like a string, so it'll combine it into one string that just says the meaning of life is 42. Everything does not, in fact, explode. That would be pretty cool, but unfortunately, JavaScript doesn't do that. It has a way of handling that. Okay, number 2, what is the output of the following? It is 143, yeah. So that is just us storing 12 into const. I realize now that I haven't even gone over variables, so I'm really surprised that a lot of you have got this. But yes, so we do 12 times 13 minus 13, so that is 143. And I apologize to everyone that I'm making you guys do math outside of school. And lastly, we have the output of the following. Okay, so 10 is less than 12 and not false. So 10 is less than 12, that is true. And we use the AND operator on not false. So that is both true and true. So we get true. And finally, we get console.log, not everything is true. So even though true is a Boolean, one cool thing about JavaScript, or painful, depending on who you ask, is that once you combine these two things, the true becomes a string that says true. So once you concatenate those together, you get not everything is true. Cool. Yeah, a lot of you guys did really good. So great job all around. Okay, let me stop sharing. And let's get back into this. So next up, we have variables. So you notice that we had a lot of these values bouncing around, but we didn't really have any way to use them. Let's say we wanted some value and we wanted to be able to use it later for some sort of computation. Also, let's say that we wanted to have some sort of more human readable way to describe the value we're seeing at. For example, the number 20 doesn't really mean much, but once I associate it with my age, it starts to represent my age. So the way we can do that in JavaScript is using variables. And the way we use variables is we store values, which we've seen before, into variables to be able to use them later. Some use cases when you're developing an app could be you want to save chat messages into a variable, or you want to save your email address available in later, because you always want to reference back to the email address to make sure your user is logged in. Okay, so in JavaScript, there's two ways of declaring variables. There's actually 3 ways, but let's pretend there's 2. We can declare variables using let or const. So how we do this is we use the actual word const or let, and then the name that we want to give to the variable, and then the value we want to assign to that variable. So on the top we have, we declare const first month, and then we assign the January value to that. Also, we have let age. So we have an age variable, and then we assign 20 to that. So one point of distinction between const and let is that const variables are constant variables. So they cannot change their values after they're initially assigned. Okay, let's do some quick examples related to that. So let's just have let age equals 20. So that is a variable declaration and assignment. And you'll notice I've added a semicolon here. We can actually take that off because semicolons are, I left it on again, sorry. Okay, we can actually take it off because semicolons are optional in JavaScript. So it's mostly a stylistic choice. And what we can do to this is we can add 1 to it. Let's say it's my birthday. And then once we do that computation, we can store it back into this variable to update it. So if we do that, we get 21. And once I print out what age is, we get 21. So let's also take a look at our first month example. That's January. And here we'll see the difference between the two. So if we want to say in some alternate dimension, the first month is actually February, it'll give us an error and it'll yell at us because we tried to assign to a constant variable. So that's the biggest difference between the let and const variable declarations. One rule of thumb, usually in JavaScript, or to be safe, is you should usually declare your variables as const unless you're absolutely sure that you're going to be changing in the future, just because it's safer to know that nothing's going to unexpectedly change your variables in the future. And once you find that you need to change your variable to reassign it to something, then you can promote it up to let. Cool. Okay, I see the questions are still being answered. That's good. Okay, let us hop into the next thing. See, that's where the poll should have gone. That is on me, guys. I'm sorry. Okay, so let's talk about functions. Oh, before that, I see some questions. Can you reassign a variable to a different type? In JavaScript, yes, you can. So I could have done, we still have access to age. I could have been age equals the string 21, and that would be fine. Now it's a string. If you use a loop in JS, would you have to make a variable a let? Okay, we're actually not covering loops today. That'll be in a future workshop. But I think it can still be const. And I'll let a mentor take that over if they can. Okay. So functions. So before we get into functions, let's give a little bit of motivation for why we would need something like functions. Let's say we have this use case where we need to find the area of a circle, and we have different radii that we want to test out. So using what we've learned so far only, we could have some functionality like this by console logging every time the area of the circle with radius 3 is, and then we would perform the computation to find the area of a circle over and over again. So 3.14 times 3 times 3. And then if we have another one with radius 6, we would have to do it again, 3.14 times 6 times 6. And you can see how this is getting kind of tedious. We have to copy and paste this line over and over again and manually change each time what the value of the radius is. And this is a lot of repeated code, which is usually a big no-no in programming. But it's okay because all of us were guilty about it at one point or another. So there's no shame behind it. So how is there a way that we can avoid manually changing all this information over and over again and just have one piece of code that we reuse over and over again? So this, in fact, is where functions come in. So functions are these things in JavaScript that are useful when you want to perform a similar action over and over again. And what functions do is they take an input, they perform some computation on that input, and then they return an output value. And you might be more familiar with the math function, which I gave an example here of f of x is equal to x plus 3. So in this case, you have an input variable, which is x, and then you perform some computation on it. So you add 3, and then after that computation, you'll return the output, which is f of x. So funnily enough, JavaScript functions are very similar to math functions. So they take an input, which in JavaScript we call either a parameter or an argument, and then it performs some computation on it within the function body. And then once all that's done, it'll return a value, which is its output. So here I have a valid JavaScript function declaration. You will use the keyword function, and then the name of whatever you want to call the function. You'll pass in a parameter, which is our input. And then using whatever you called your parameter, you'll perform a computation on that parameter. In this case, we're using the area of circle example. So that's 3.14 times r. And once that computation is done, we return it outside of this function using return. And you can use, you can use this function using parentheses after the name and passing in an actual value into this function to be used as the parameter. So as an example here, if I want to find the area of circle with radius 3, I would do area of circle 3. So in JavaScript, there's actually two different ways of declaring functions. The first is what we've already saw, which more formally is called a function declaration. There is a function keyword, you have the name, and then you have some parameters associated to it. But this bottom is an example of a function expression, which uses the const keyword, and then you name it whatever you wanted to call your function, which is myfunc again. Then you have parameters, and then you have some computation. And these are almost exactly the same. It's just how you write it. And this function expression syntax on the bottom is actually also called arrow functions, sort of because this little equals and greater sign that is separating the parameters and the function body sort of looks like an arrow. So this actually makes it a little bit, brings out a pretty cool distinction in JavaScript that shows that functions in JavaScript are actually values themselves that can be assigned to variables. So this one you can think more of as there's this function and we are assigning it to a myfunc variable, but after we can call it as we would any function that we declared as a function declaration. Okay, so it might seem like these two ways of writing functions are a little bit different, but if we dissect them a little bit, we'll notice that there's a lot of parallels between them. So first off is you need some keyword to signify that it is a function declaration. For the top one, you use the literal word function, and for the bottom one, it's const. Then comes the name of the function. In both cases, I've called both of my functions myfunc. You'll have your parameters that you pass in, and in both of these cases, I have two parameters, which is arg1 and arg2. And lastly, you have your function body. So this is where all the magic computations are being done, and they're surrounded by curly braces in both cases. So the reason why I bring up both of these function declarations is that in React Native, you will inevitably see both of these declarations while you're working on it. And throughout this workshop series, these two function syntaxes will be used interchangeably. So it's a good idea to be familiar with them early on in the process. Cool, so let's hop into the console again. And let's write our function. And I'm going to use the function declaration syntax for now. Let's do the area of circle. And we want to have a parameter to work with that is a radius. So we will give as a parameter r. And in the function body, which we've denoted with the curly braces, we will perform some kind of computation. So what we want to do, because we're finding the area of circle, is use pi, which is 3.14, and we want to square the radius, which is r times r. But remember that we want to use the value that we gain from this computation, and for that we need to use return. So this is our full function declaration. Let me put into stone by pressing enter. And now we can use the function and call it by saying the function name, which is area of circle, and the 3 here. And once we press enter, we have found the area of a circle with radius 3, which is 28.2 and a bunch of digits. And this is making the process of finding different areas of different circles with different radiuses really easy, because you don't have to copy and paste this entire console.log line and manually change things. All you have to do is change the value that you pass into the parameter. So area of circle, let's say now we want to find one of radius 5. All we have to do is change the parameter value to 5. And once we press enter, we've easily found the area of that. Again, if I get 6, all we'd have to do is change 6. And this becomes a piece of cake. Okay. So there are a couple of questions. Why doesn't the function have a semicolon at the end? So this is just a small syntax distinction between function declarations and expressions. It's more a part of the standard to not put a semicolon after the function declaration, but you do after the function expression because it's an expression in JavaScript. And I see that Jody just put what I said, but a lot better. So I'll leave it at that. Why is the result 28.2 and a bunch of digits and not 28.26? That's because JavaScript doesn't round by default. You'll have to do some extra steps to have it round. What if you call area of circle with a string? Is there any way to include a type for the parameter? So that is where this new thing that has come up called Typescript comes in, because JavaScript by itself does not check your types. So it kind of just like, there's this trust that goes on between JavaScript and the programmer. It's like, please just pass numbers into this, or else I will break. There is no type checking that's being done, so there's nothing stopping us from passing in a string there, and I don't think strings can multiply. I don't know, someone better JavaScript. But there's something new that came up recently called Typescript, which is something above JavaScript that allows you to annotate your code with types. And once it does that, Typescript will check if all of your types comply. So it'll give you an error if you have a number, but you use it in a way that's only strings are able to be used. If you do something like the area of the circle is plus area of circle 9, would your result be the area of the circle's number? Yes, exactly, because what we're doing when we're calling the function is we are getting the value out because of the return. So actually, once we do that and we call a function, we can actually store the value that the function obtains by calling it. So let's say constant area equals area of circle 3. So now we've gotten that value that comes out of area of circle 3, and we stored it into this area variable. So now we can log it as the area of the circle is plus the area variable. And once we enter that, we'll get the area of circle is that value that is now stored in area. And to make that a little more like what you showed, let me just put the function in that directly. So area of circle 3, and that works exactly the same. Cool. Okay. So let me keep going with the poll. And I'm pretty sure this is where the poll is supposed to go this time. Okay, let me launch it now. Enough time. And the poll and share results. Okay. Cool, yeah. Number 1 is 18. We are logging magic and we're calling it with 4 as the parameter. And once 4 is passed into magic, we return 2 separate function calls to add 3. So we pass in x, which is 4, into add 3. So add 3, when you add 3 to 4, that's 7. So the first function call just becomes 7 as its value. And then again, once we do add 3, x plus x is 4 plus 4 equals 8. And then when we add 3 to that, that's 11. So 7 plus 11 is 18. Quick maths. Okay. Number 2, we have a call to foo, and foo will console log a call to a, concatenating that to ur, concatenating that to a call to b. And a will return the string whoosh, and b will return the string wiser. So that'll just concatenate all 3 of those together. It looks like the majority of you put wish you or wiser with no spaces in between, but this is kind of a trick question, because it is actually wish you, no spaces, plus a space, and then r wiser, because you'll notice that the string in the middle has a space by itself. So that isn't going anywhere when you concatenate them. So congrats to the 37%. Okay, and finally, number 3, we have a console log to yeet. And what yeet does is it just calls tick, tac-toe, and it adds the result, the result values of those together. So A is equal to 5 in this case because we passed 5 in the first parameter. Once we call tick, that'll become 5 plus 6 equals 11. Okay, B is 2 in this case, and we'll do 2 times 7, which is 14. So now that's 11 plus 14 equals 25. And then 3 is C, so toe 3 will be 3 minus 9, which is -6. So we get 25 plus -6 is 19. So yes, congrats. Okay. All right, so let me stop sharing. And let's dive back in. So up next, we have conditionals. So conditionals in JavaScript are this notion that the action that JavaScript takes in your code depends on some Boolean condition beforehand. So an example of that portrays this is something that just happened to me this morning. I had a dilemma. Am I going to go to my 8 a.m. lecture today? So in this case, I had one Boolean condition that based on that result will affect what actions I take. And that Boolean condition is it or is it not after 8 a.m.? So if the answer to that is yes, it's 8 a.m., that means I've hit the snooze button multiple times. And at this point, I have no intention of going to class. I've already missed a couple minutes, so it's not worth it. I'll just watch the recording later. So in that case, the branch that I would take is no. And because of that, the action I would take would be possibly to just stay in bed and sleep a little longer and watch the lecture later. But if it's still before 8 a.m., even though it's 7:59 or something, I will still decide to go to lecture. I'll just hop out of bed and open my laptop. So if it's before 8 a.m., I'll think it's still worth it because I'll just have to make up more work later on. And because that condition is it is before 8 a.m., we'll take the yes branch. And based on that, I will get out of bed and I'll turn on my laptop and I'll tune into the lecture. What if it's exactly 8 a.m.? It's a good question. I'll put that under after 8 a.m. Even 8 a.m. on the dot is too late for me. What if it's 7:50 a.m. the next day? Ah, you found an edge case in my code. All right. So the way we'll represent this in conditionals in JavaScript is by using the if statement. And this is the most simplest form of a conditional. So what it does is you say if, and you check a Boolean condition here within parentheses. If that condition results in true, then you'll take the actions within the if statement block. Otherwise, if that condition is false, you'll skip over this block entirely and just keep going on with your code. Okay, so up next is a little bit more complex, is the if-else syntax. So previously, we only had a case if the condition was true, and if the condition wasn't true, we would do nothing else extra to handle that. So what the optional else statement does is it adds on extra logic. So if the condition in the if condition is false, then instead of that code being run in the if block, the code in the else block will be run otherwise. So there's two different conditions that'll be handled, and both cases are handled in this case. So this one is more resembling what my example was. So the condition was if it's after 8 a.m. That would be my condition. So if condition is true, it'll take certain actions if true, and that'll be this to stay in bed, and that'll be to watch the lecture later. But if it's still before 8 a.m., that condition will result in false. So the if condition won't be run, and instead it'll go to the else condition. And the else condition's actions will be to get out of bed and open the laptop and watch the lecture. And finally, we have the most complete version of the conditional syntax in JavaScript, which is the if, else ladder. So you can pile on any amount of else if statements in between the if and else we previously discussed. And each of these else if statements will check other conditions besides the previous condition that was in the if statement. So if you have other conditions you want to check for, and you have certain actions that you want to correspond to those conditions if they result in true, then that's what you would use an else if statement in. And you can use an arbitrary as many else if statements as you want, or as little, or you can just leave them out entirely, as we had previously. Okay, some examples. Okay, so let's just directly try and represent what I was just talking about. Let's declare a function, and let's make an arrow function this time. So let's call this function is Eugene functional. Actually, times might be more difficult. Let's talk about my sleep schedule instead. So I have this thing where if it's before, or if I sleep under 6 hours, then I will not be able to focus at all. Otherwise, if I get above 6 hours, I'm fine. I know I'm weird and a lot of people are able to function a lot more, but if it's under 6, then I am screwed for the rest of the day and I can't focus. So using this, let's create that in an if conditional. So let's make a function called is Eugene functional. And this will take in one parameter that is the number of hours of sleep I get. So that will be hours. And then we use the arrows to separate the parameters and the function body. And let's make this the most simplest form for now. Let's actually make this let, because I'll be changing it up soon. Okay, so if I get under 6 hours, we can represent this in code as hours is less than 6. Then we'll log a statement that just says, I won't be able to focus today. And you'll notice that there's this weird coloring right here. This is actually because the apostrophe I wrote here is the same as single quotes. So one cool thing you can do in JavaScript to avoid this case is if you're using single quotes inside your string, you can use double quotes here instead, and that'll work perfectly fine. Okay. So now that we have this, we have a function that will tell me if I'm functional, pun intended. So if is Eugene functional, let's say I got 7 hours of, or let's say I got 4 hours of sleep. If this is the case, I won't be able to focus today. But right now, the way it currently is, if I got a nice healthy amount of sleep, like 8, and if I press enter, nothing happens. We wanted to still say something if it's if I got a normal amount of sleep. So that's where we would add in the else case. If I cycle back to this, let's tack on an else. If I did not get less than 6 hours of sleep, we'll log something that says, I will function normally today. Okay, once you press enter there. If we do what we did previously with less than 6 hours of sleep, we'll again get I won't be able to focus today. But now if we get a normal amount of sleep and we put 8, it'll say I will function normal today. So that is cool. Okay, and now let's take a look at the else if. So let's say, and this is another thing about me, for some reason, too much sleep is also a thing. So if I get over 12 hours of sleep, I won't be able to sleep the next day. So the way we'll add on this into our is Eugene functional logic is by adding an else if statement. So let's go back to is Eugene functional. And in between the if and else, let's add our little else if that checks if the hours slept is greater than 12. So else if, and now we have this new condition to check for, hours is greater than 12. We'll say something like, I won't, let's use double quotes, I won't be able to sleep the next day. Okay, let's make this a little prettier. Okay, everything looks good. And once we press enter, let's check for if functional. If I slept 13 hours, it'll say I won't be able to sleep the next day. Cool. Let's add one more else if check. I have another thing about me that if I get less than 3 hours of sleep, not only will I won't be able to focus, I will inevitably crash at the middle of the day on my bed. So that would be another condition to check for in our else if. So let's go back to our is Eugene functional. And let's do else if hours is less than 3. We will log I will inevitably crash during the day. So with this, we will expect our code to, if I pass in a 2, say, I will inevitably crash during the day. But if I press enter, it'll say I won't be able to focus today, which was part of the hours is less than 6, even though we wanted it to say something related to being less than 3. And why exactly is this? Well, in if-else statements, JavaScript runs through these different statements from top to bottom based on how you wrote them. And it'll check each of these conditions individually. So it'll first check if the hours is less than 6. And since we passed in 2, 2 is in fact less than 6. So already this evaluates to true. And because of that, it'll jump into the actions related to the if statement, and that'll be to console log, I won't be able to focus today. And in conditionals, once you've found one condition that is related and is true, it'll jump out of the entire thing and just keep moving on with your code. So with our 2, it found that 2 is less than 6, evaluated to true. It logged I won't be able to focus today, and that was the end of the story. So this goes to show that order does matter when you're writing conditionals. You should make sure that things that you want to go first do in fact run first. And this comes up usually with when you're working with ranges of numbers. So let's go ahead and do a little bit of fixing. Let's change this to hours is less than 3 and make sure that comes before our hours is less than 6 check. So let's copy over what that said. If hours is less than 3, I will inevitably crash during the day. And if hours is less than 6, I won't be able to focus today. So now looks like the order is right. If we do the previous case is Eugene functional with a parameter and a value of 2, it'll say I will inevitably crash during the day. And that's perfect because what it does is it goes to the first if statement. It checks if hours is less than 3 and hours is 2, which is less than 3. So it'll log I will inevitably crash during the day, and all is good. Okay, any questions I can answer? Okay, they seem to all have been answered, which is great. Great job, mentors. Okay, and with that being said, let us do the poll. And launch. Looks good. Cool. So number 1, what is the output of the following? Looks like the majority of you says not available, which is good. Test is 17 is greater than 9, which evaluates to true. And if you pass true into the condition, it'll not it, which becomes false. So the condition is false and it'll skip over that entirely. So nothing gets printed out. Number 2, your vibe is 75. Okay, it looks like all of you got this right, which is awesome. So it'll say you failed the vibe check, which is so sad. You're right at the threshold at 75, but unfortunately 75 is not greater than 75, so we couldn't give it to you. And finally, your vibe is 79. If the vibe is greater than 50, it'll console log your vibe is not strong enough, but we'll let you go. And looks like a majority of you said that was the right answer, which is good. That is the right answer. Just like I mentioned before, because conditionals are checked from top to bottom, even though the score is enough to qualify for the condition of having 79 is greater than 75 to be true, meaning you have passed, it'll have first saw that 79 is greater than 50. So that would have been true, and it would have printed out, your vibe is not strong enough, but we'll let you go. And then it would have moved on past the conditional. Great, okay. So I'll go ahead and end the poll there. Let us move on to our final topic in JavaScript, which are objects. So up until now, the only way we've seen that we can store things in variables is with single values, so a number, string, or a Boolean. But let's say, for example, we are Netflix, and we want to be able to somehow represent a movie variable. For purposes of this example, let's just say that a movie has a title, a movie has a director, and a movie has a rating associated to it. Now, of course, you can add more or less properties, but we'll just stick to this. So using what we've learned so far, one way you might represent this for each movie is by assigning and declaring a different variable for each of these properties. So let's say the first movie we want to represent is Interstellar. So we have const title1 equals Interstellar. We'll have a director related to that, director variable, excuse me, and we'll have a rating variable. And then let's say we want to add cats into our database. So then we'll have another title variable for cats, another director for Tom Hooper, and another one for the rating. And so on we would go, declaring 3 separate variables for all of our movies in Netflix. This is, you can already kind of see it's kind of inefficient, but for declaring 3 different variables for each movie. If you wanted to add another property on later on, let's just say like the release date, that would require adding another variable for everything. And also right here, I've grouped these different variables in my code together, but there's nothing really tying together these variables and saying that they're really associated to each other. And in fact, this is not how Netflix does it. I hope. I haven't worked for Netflix, so I can't say, but this is probably what it would look like if it was like this, because there is a better way, at least in JavaScript. In JavaScript, you can use objects, which are ways that you can store a collection of data into a single place using key value pairs. And then objects are themselves values, so then they can be stored in variables. So here I've gone ahead as example and declared a movie1 variable, and we store an object. And inside this object are key value pairs with all of the information we had before about our first movie, which was Interstellar. So let's break this down a little bit more. On the left, these are the properties of the objects. So they're things that correspond to what the object is made of. So a movie object has a title property, it has a director property, and it has a rating property. In turn, each of these properties have a value that are associated to them, and they're separated in the objects using a colon. So the title has a specific value of Interstellar here. Director is Christopher Nolan, and rating is 8.6. So this is how we would go about representing an object. And this way we would only have one variable for all of this data. So it's easy to bundle them together and keep them close because there is not really a use case where you would need them separately anyways. Okay, one cool thing about objects is that functions can go inside objects too. Recall that I mentioned that in JavaScript, functions are themselves values, so they can be a value in this key value pair. So in this example, I've gone ahead and changed the rating property to be a print rating method, and inside functions inside objects are called methods. So all it does is just it prints out the previous rating that we had for it. In fact, it's not just limited to functions. Any value can go inside objects too, and this includes more objects. So I've gone ahead and made rating a little bit more specific by making the value another object, and inside this object we have a score property, which is 8.6 as we had before, and then we have the source property, so where this rating came from, and in this case it was IMDb. So now that we have this collection of data, how exactly do we go about getting the data inside of it? So let's say we wanted to get the title of this movie. So we do that in JavaScript by accessing objects. And there's two different notations for how you can do this, and they both do the same thing. One is the dot notation, and the way you can resemble that is object dot property name, and that's where the dot comes from. And then you also have the bracket notation. So you have these brackets around this property that you want to access. So object brackets property name. And in the bracket notation, you have to put either single quotes or double quotes around the property. So this is both ways we would access interstellar inside this object. We would either access movie1 dot name, or we would access movie1 bracket name. And also another thing we can do with objects is they're not set in stone. So we can go ahead and update their properties. And the way we do that using dot notation is very similar to how we would do it for accessing it. We first access the property that we want to change. So in this case, it's movie1.name. We then reassign it the value that we want it to be updated to. So let's say I'm hacking Netflix for some reason, and I want people to be convinced that the Emoji Movie got a rating of 8.6. And by the way, it's not this easy to hack Netflix, so don't try. You can update it by doing movie1.name equals the Emoji Movie. So now once we print out what the value of movie1.name is, it'll in fact give us the Emoji Movie. And also using bracket notation, we can do a very similar action. We'll have first object, sorry, this was supposed to be bracket notation first, but it's fine, both are fine. Once we get that out, we modify the object by doing movie1 bracket name equals the Emoji Movie here. And here I just wanted to point out that this is one thing that the bracket notation has over dot notation. The thing inside of the brackets doesn't have to be literally the property name. It just has to be expression that results in the property name. So just a simple example I have here is I've split the two parts of name and I concatenate them together, which results in a single string that's name. So that works perfectly fine. And once we log that out, movie1 name, we will again get the Emoji Movie. Okay, so let's take a look at this in the console. So let's declare our variable movie1 equals, we want it to have a title property, and we'll set the value by putting colon and then interstellar. We want a director property, so the director is Christopher Nolan. Lastly, we have a rating. So the way we do this is just colon and 8.6. Okay, so once that's good, press enter. We have our movie variable. Let's just, for sake of sanity, log it out, and we get this object. And inside this object, we get a title, director, and rating, and a little bit of extra stuff that I won't get into, but it's not important. Okay, so now that we have this object, we have related data inside of it, but we have to access it first before we can use it. So the way we do it with dot notation is using a dot. So we do movie1 dot title equals, we want to change this to the Emoji Movie. And once we do that, if we check what movie1 dot title is, we'll get the Emoji Movie. So now it's successfully been updated, and we can see how we can access it. Okay, so now let's take a look at how we can use the bracket notation instead. Let's first see what the current director is. Let's print out movie1 bracket director, and let's just show that this concatenation works because it just takes in an expression that becomes the property itself. Once we do that, we'll get Christopher Nolan out. Okay, so now let's change the director, and I don't know why I still remember this, but the director of the Emoji Movie, is Todd Landis. So once we console log that out, we'll get our new value, Todd Landis. Cool. Are there any questions? Okay, if not, that is the last thing I wanted to do for today, but let's do a poll just to check everyone's understanding. Okay, number 1. So we have a person object with the first name and a last name property. What are all the valid ways to access the last name property? And it looks like most of you are right. So the 3 answers that are mostly full right now are correct. First one is dot notation, person dot last name. Second one is the bracket notation using the brackets and the string. And the last one is also true because last plus name concatenated together forms the last name property. Cool. Number 2, how would we add a property is student that's set to true? Check all that apply. Okay, so cool. So in JavaScript, when you put a property that you have not put in yet in your object, it's almost like creating a new property. So that is true. So person dot is student is true. Person bracket is student is true. And both of those are right. Oh, sorry, I forgot to share. Okay. Sorry, y'all. And lastly, what is the output of the following? If person dot is student, we console log congrats, you get a free discount, else we say we have to pay full price. And since we set it to true, we can access it out using the dot notation, and that expression will be true. So we get congrats, you get a free discount. Good job, guys. Awesome. So with that, I wanted to thank you guys so much for coming and sticking all the way through. This is a really cool workshop to get to work on, and this is a really cool workshop series to work on. Again, please fill out the feedback form. It helps us a lot. And again, you'll get a chance to win an Amazon gift card. So if that isn't enough incentive, I don't know what is. But yeah, with that being said, feel free to stay if you have any questions, but that is all I have for today. So thank you guys so much.